we are absolutely delighted to be here. When I say we, I mean I brought a whole delegation of my ministers with me. So first of all, you've already met James Carpenter. I'll talk a little bit more about him because he has opened up our Ottawa office. So we now have an Ottawa presence here. For those of you who are from Ottawa, that'll be an opportunity for you to be able to engage with our ministers. I'd be more than happy to tell you why we're doing that when Rachel does the Q&A. So I'll just plant the seed that I'd be quite happy to answer questions like that. But I may ask my ministers, if it's not too much, you're not in the middle of a mouthful, just to stand up so that you know who they are. Rebecca Schultz is our Minister of Environment and Protected Areas. R.J. Sigurdsson is our Agriculture and Irrigation Minister. Nate Glubish is our Minister of Technology and Innovation. Mike Ellis is my Deputy Premier and our Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services. Rick Wilson is our Minister of Indigenous Relations. And Devin Drisking is our Minister of Transportation and Economic Corridors. And I'll just give special mention to Marshall Smith, my Chief of Staff. You may have heard a little bit about him as well because he's pioneering our recovery-oriented system of care for treatment of mental health and addiction. In our province, we believe in seeing people on a pathway to recovery rather than medical assistance in dying. So I'm glad that the message came through loud and clear to our health minister in Ottawa. And I can tell you that what we're doing in Alberta is getting international recognition. And we're going to continue down the path of making sure people have a pathway to get their lives back. And I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A as well. But being that this is the Economic Club of Canada, let me begin with an economic message to start off with. And I want to thank you, Natasha, for inviting me to speak at one of Canada's most important and respected discussion forums. And I appreciate the chance to share some of my views about how we can improve our country together. That's obviously a complex question with many possible approaches, but one approach is extremely straightforward, and that is strengthening Alberta, because a strong Alberta means a strong Canada. Our province contributes a great deal, and we are determined to contribute even more. Contributing has always been our way, from the energy we share to the economic strength we provide, and from the jobs we create across the country to the warm welcome we extend to workers from other provinces choosing to call Alberta home. Albertans are proud Canadians, and disagreements between governments or moments of friction in the national discourse doesn't change that. We want to help, and we want to ensure that Canada thrives. We want to do our part to protect and build upon the institutions and the ways of life that make our country great. And we have the means to do this. Our resources and ingenuity translate into revenues that support Canadian values and Canadian public services. Alberta's advantage is Canada's advantage. This has been the case in the past, and it will continue to be the case collectively if the federal government lets it. One of the reasons I'm here today, and in Toronto tomorrow, and in Washington later in the week, is we need to highlight the need for a new consensus between Alberta and Canada. Hopefully all sides can get on the same page and move forward together. That's not going to happen in just one visit, but it can happen with time and with patience. The goodwill is there. I've heard it in conversations with my colleagues across the country. There's rising appreciation in Canada for everything Alberta provides when we are free to expand and diversify and export our resources. So I want to discuss what Alberta's government is doing for Canada's economy, its prosperity, and its people, and how much more we can and will do if permitted. Because Alberta is one of the country's major economic engines, and our success is Canada's success. We're pursuing growth, investment, and innovation for the benefit of all Canadians. And it all starts with creating space for private enterprise, innovation, and entrepreneurship. One of our first priorities upon taking office was lowering taxes. So now with a corporate rate of 8%, Alberta's general corporate income tax is now 30% lower than the next lowest province. I feel like I need to underscore that in case anyone's thinking of a head office move. We're 30% lower than the next lowest province, and the combined federal provincial tax rate is lower than the combined federal state rates of 44 US jurisdictions. We've also cut red tape sharply. You may have seen that we got an A from my old bosses at the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. We're now saving Alberta businesses more than an estimated $2.75 billion because of red tape reduction. And after years of uncertainty and difficulty caused by the pandemic and inflation, we're helping businesses to stay open and grow and create more jobs. We've also launched tax credits for industries where Alberta has natural advantages, like petrochemicals and agri-processing. Companies around the world are lining up to apply, with our petrochemical program alone receiving applications worth $39 billion in potential investment. And we're working on a similar initiative for capital-intensive projects like ammonia and helium, lithium, liquefied natural gas, minerals, geothermal energy, and more. And everything we're doing is designed to help Alberta do what Alberta does best, use our resources to take Canada's economy to new heights. The opportunities are obvious. Between the war in Ukraine, attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, and fears of a wider war in the Middle East, the world is looking for safe, reliable supplies of energy, and we want to deliver it. And Canada should be doing everything possible to help us. Demand for oil and natural gas will last for decades because nothing else is ready to replace hydrocarbons at scale. And Alberta is well placed to fill that demand. Our province accounts for about 80% of Canada's total oil production, 80%. And we're also the country's largest natural gas producer. If we can get more of this energy to global markets, the benefits will flow to all Canadians. And there are a lot of benefits. Altogether, Canada's oil and gas industry adds more than $100 billion to the nation's GDP annually. It supports almost 400,000 Canadian jobs, and it generates billions of dollars every year in public revenue through taxes, leases, royalty payments, and a lot of those taxes go to Ottawa as well in the form of personal and corporate income taxes. Expanding oil and gas production creates more funding for our healthcare systems, more money for new housing and infrastructure, and it brings fresh investment into other parts of the economy that support the energy industry. It's also a boost for Canada politically, establishing our country as a significant contributor to global peace and security. More Alberta oil and gas is a win for the planet, too. Our LNG, ammonia, and hydrogen can help other countries shift away from high-emission energy sources. Clean Alberta natural gas does have a business case in support of growing demand in Asia and long-term fuel switching off of coal. The ambassadors of Japan and South Korea are both here, so I wanted to make sure that they knew that I don't believe we should be hoarding our gas in Canada. I believe that we should be finding ways to export it. And our producers are steadily reducing their own emissions. The emissions intensity of Alberta's bitumen has fallen by 23% per barrel over the past decade. And it's slated to decline by as much as 28% over the next 10 years. Producers are planning to invest $24 billion on projects to lower annual emissions by 22 million tons by 2030. And our government is accelerating that process further to get the province to carbon neutrality by 2050, which is already a target that has been set by the Pathways Group, which is our largest oil sands producers. These efforts are built on an industrial carbon pricing and emission trading system. We were the first in the country to establish a price for industrial carbon and develop a program to be able to have those credits exchanged. We reinvest the money collected into clean technology and innovation like carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We recently launched a carbon capture incentive program to spur industry to develop the technology even faster. We've set aside more than $3.2 billion to turn CCUS into a mature technology. The field is advancing with more than 11 million tons of CO2 safely stored in existing projects in Alberta. And if you talk to Scott Moe, he'll tell you they've done another 40 million tons in Saskatchewan as well. And we've achieved a 45% drop in methane emissions from oil and gas 3 years ahead of schedule. We set a target of 2025 and we've achieved it. In addition, about 25% of our power now comes from renewable sources, putting us on track to achieve a goal of 30% by 2030, as long as we've got reliable natural gas backup. Our power grid has also cut emissions by more than 50% since 2005. And all of these numbers are trending in the right direction, and the upside is clear. In Alberta, Canada has a resource-rich province that aims to grow sustainably, protecting people's quality of life at home, and enhancing the country's reputation abroad. It's tough to argue with this picture. It's tough to argue with the advantage of Alberta energy, and yet the federal government persists in doing exactly that. In fact, they've been trying to hamstring Alberta at every turn and destroy our oil and natural gas industry with punishing policies. An oil and gas emissions cap, federal electricity regulations, the plastics registry, Bill C-69, the Impact Assessment Act. The list is long and getting longer. These are attempts to strangle the oil and natural gas industry, throwing away its benefits without a thought for Canada's future. There is no other energy exporting nation in the world who is contemplating shutting down a vital industry that today accounts for more than 80% of our exports to our most important trading partner, the United States. There are also unconstitutional intrusions into provincial jurisdiction and the right of every province to develop its resources and its power grid as we see fit. Thankfully, the Supreme Court recognized as much in its ruling on Bill C-69, the Impact Assessment Act. Alberta wants to be treated fairly, not to have the federal government impose divisive policies and instill uncertainty in industries across Canada. So I hope to report back on many more victories as we continue to challenge the federal government's ideologically motivated decisions. I wish we didn't have to do it that way, but I think we've got 12 different legal actions lined up to fight them back on different areas of intrusion. And I want to be clear, Alberta isn't looking for confrontations with Ottawa. We don't want to be at odds with the federal government. We want to work with Ottawa, other provinces, and industry at every step to build a better and more prosperous nation. This is not some grand vision, it's just a practical, achievable goal that is based and founded on plain truths and rich resources. Alberta is already partnering productively with the federal government on some areas connected to the energy industry. We have a bilateral working group with the federal government dedicated to aligning policies and incentives for ammonia, for small modular nuclear reactors, for carbon capture utilization and storage, and other emissions reduction technologies. I must tell you, we have a net zero hydrogen facility in Air Products. We have a net zero petrochemical facility that's being developed with Dow Chemical. We have a net zero cement facility, which is being proposed for Heidelberg, first in the world. I've told my friends from South Korea we'd love to have a net zero steel plant as well in my province. And that way then we would be able to decarbonize the entire supply chain. That's the kind of leadership that we want to show because we've got immense ability to capture CO2 with the geology that we have in our province. But the group that we're working with will secure credit for carbon reduction stemming from more LNG exports to the world markets. We want improved relations with Ottawa. And that's why, as of today, as I mentioned, we've opened a new office right here in the capital. And it's run by James Carpenter, who is a proven leader with a lot of experience in Alberta and economic development. He'll be advocating for our province on Parliament Hill and in the media and among decision makers. And hopefully the Alberta office will lead to new forms of cooperation. Because in Alberta, that's all we've ever wanted. What's missing on Ottawa's side is an openness to the facts and a willingness to dismiss radical ideology in favor of reason. Canada's future shouldn't be held hostage by activists. It should be something that we can work towards in the interests of all Canadians. Alberta's energy offers the best way to do this, but it's going to take a lot more infrastructure and a lot less legislative interference to pull it off. I hope everyone here can tell the federal government the same thing that we are, because they need to hear it from a wide audience. The alternatives are energy poverty, material poverty, a failing economy, and the loss of the Canadian advantage in a time when the world needs more of it. None of that should even be up for discussion. But with that, let's get into the discussion. I'm looking forward to the Q&A, and thanks so much for coming out today.
Well, Rachel, where would you like to bring that? Why don't you come up, Rachel? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Those that don't know me, I'm Bob Masterson, president of the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada. And our association, many members here with us today, are very honored to support today's event. Appreciate Natasha and the Economic Club of Canada for bringing us all together today. Thank you, Natasha. Premier, it's always a highlight on the Ottawa calendar when a provincial premier comes to town to share their perspectives and talk honestly about the other side of the federal-provincial relationship. And we're especially thankful for you joining us today and sharing details on Alberta's plans to strengthen its representation in Ottawa with your new office. Thank you, Premier. Our country, and the Premier said this, our country does work best when stakeholders, the business community, all levels of government come together to pursue common objectives and take action on common problems. And this was best exemplified for us in November last year when Dow Canada announced that with the support of the province of Alberta, the government of Canada, and the municipality of Fort Saskatchewan, that it was embarking to build the world's first net zero petrochemical complex right here in Canada, probably a $12+ billion investment when that all comes together. So that's what happens when our governments can work together with the business community and stakeholders. Alberta's abundant resources, its infrastructure, including that important infrastructure for carbon capture and storage, the competitive investment environment in the province, these are positioning the province as among the leading global destinations for our global industries' low carbon and growth objectives. The province has long been consistent in its belief that achieving that low carbon economy is wholly contingent on investment attraction. I had the chance about a year ago to spend the day with the Premier in Medicine Hat, and I was so impressed with her immediate understanding of the relationship of reaching these objectives to be net zero and understanding how much capital that's going to take and what Alberta could do to make that happen. So we've seen that reflected in the province's actions. They've worked very closely with the federal government to have a complementary approach to carbon capture and storage. And Premier, I can't speak directly, but I would suggest you're going to have some more announcement decisions to celebrate in the weeks and months to come. You know, at the same time, though, the Premier and her ministers have been very forceful in rejecting unilateral regulatory approaches that aren't accompanied by investment attraction. The Premier's had the conviction to challenge those approaches in the court system, and she's won more than a couple times. Thank you, Premier. So when I tie that back to our sector, we're going to need to attract $200 to $300 billion in the next 2 decades to decarbonize. If you look across the Canadian economy as a whole, RBC says we need $2 trillion in the next 20 years. $2 trillion. That's $100 billion a year of new investment to decarbonize. It's a sobering thought when you think of the record we've had the last couple decades. Yet again, for our sector, Alberta, and with the assistance of the Premier and her government, has positioned itself at the forefront of investment attraction. And in addition to Dow's recent announcement, I apologize, Premier, I'm a bit out of date. I have said several additional chemistry projects totaling another $20 billion plus, whereas the Premier's corrected me and said it's $39 billion in chemistry investments. So, and every one of those, the punchline to all those, it's not just new investment. Every one of those investments is envisioned as low carbon, net carbon zero from initial operation. We can do both at the same time, but we can't do it if we don't have approaches that attract investment. So again, with Canada and Alberta working together to improve investment attraction for carbon capture and storage, Premier, you will have some more announcements. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take that coordination and collaboration between Alberta and the federal government, and that's why it's so important to hear the news of the new office opening here, to represent those interests and hear from the rest of the stakeholders and our interactions with Ottawa and what we all need to help attract this investment and grow in Alberta. So, Madam Premier, thank you again for everything you're doing to attract investment and build that prosperity for Alberta and Canada. And thank you, Economic Club of Canada, for hosting today's event. It's now my pleasure to welcome someone who probably doesn't need an introduction to most people in the room, but to welcome Rachel Curran to the stage for the Q&A portion of today's event. Rachel's well known to many of you. She's currently head of public policy with Meta Canada. A lawyer by training, Rachel's had over 15 years of experience in public affairs, chief of staff to a couple of provincial cabinet ministers, and of course provided important strategic advice and policy advice to the Prime Minister Harper's government. Before joining Meta, she continued her work with the Prime Minister in his firm, Harper & Associates, has also been an instructor at Carleton University's Riddell program in political management, and she appears regularly had appeared regularly as a panelist and commentator on power and politics. Please join me in welcoming Rachel, and this should be a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Bob. I was going to say, don't waste time on that. We need to get to questions. I have so many questions, and I know we have limited time. So, Premier, the Ottawa office, it is fantastic to finally have a permanent presence for Alberta in Ottawa, the nation's capital. I can say as a resident of Ottawa, we've been waiting for this for a long time. So what's the purpose of this? The federal-provincial relationship has sometimes seemed at odds, to put it diplomatically. So what are you hoping to accomplish? Is this an attempt to collaborate more with the federal government?
I think what you'll see is that our ministers will be able to be here more frequently, host meetings. We were delighted as well that many chiefs joined us this morning. I should honor Chief Willie Littlechild, who blessed the office this morning with the prayers. An elder who's responsible for planting the seed about the idea of our Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. We also have Chief Isaac, who's here, Chief Roy Whitney, and Chief Cody Thomas, unfortunately, wasn't able to join us from Enoch. But we also have the chief of Siksika as well, who's joined us. So I'm not sure if they're all in the room today, but we hope that we can also be a voice bridging the divide between the federal government and First Nations communities. We've got some amazing collaborations that happened with First Nations, but sometimes they need an additional voice to help elevate, I think, and accelerate their issues. So that's one aspect. Our ministers will be here as well. And when I found out that Quebec had an office in Ottawa, I thought, so Quebec, because of the bilingual requirements, probably have 90% of the civil service. They also are just across the river in Hull, and they feel a need to have an office presence in Ottawa. So we felt that it's probably time for us to be here too. In fact, James has already reached out to, I think they call it their embassy. And so we're going to work. We call ours just an office, just letting you know. And so we're going to see if there's some ways that we can have some common cause. Because what I would tell you is that when I meet with the fellow premiers, it's not just us that feels the frustration with the federal relationship. Every single premier has very similar frustrations. And so if we can help to pave the way to, I think, more collaboration, we want to be able to do that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So on a similar note, you traveled to Dubai recently. We haven't seen this a lot from provincial leaders. So you traveled internationally. Why did you feel that was necessary, and what message did you carry?
I think it was demonstrated why we needed to be there. Because if we weren't there, the only voice representing Canada would be Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. And I think we also saw a bit about the federal strategy there. We had established tables so that we could work together collaboratively on a carbon neutrality target by 2050, on issues around the grid, on nuclear, hydrogen. And yet, when he arrived there, he told us he was going to be announcing a bunch of policy, that we'd have to sign a non-disclosure agreement if we wanted to see what it was in advance. And there was no consultation on the emissions cap that was announced, the methane's cap that was announced. And so we know that if we had not been there, that final communique probably would have been a lot more offensive to our interests and to the way our country is supposed to work. So we are going to continue having representation there. So those of you who want to join us in Azerbaijan, happy to have you come along. And then we'll be also planning to be at Brazil as well. I think what we've very clearly seen is that national and subnational governments who are energy rich like we are, we have to have a voice at the table, and we have to make sure that we're sharing our own technologies and ideas about how to reduce emissions while still maintaining the health of the industry.
That's really smart. So, you know, Alberta seems like a bit of a bright spot in the Canadian economy at the moment. While foreign direct investment overall has been dropping, under your government, investment seems to be up in Alberta. Can you tell us about any notable wins on that front? and your prognosis for future investment. Were you talking to potential investors in Dubai? Are you trying to bring the world to Alberta? What's your plan on the investment front?
Boy, there's so much. I mean, I've mentioned already what's happening in the energy sector as well as the green energy sector, but we have major investment happening in agriculture as well. The McCain's announced a $700 million plant to expand their French fry factory, which I guess is the biggest investment that they've made since the 1950s. And we'll continue to see more develop along that agri-food corridor. We are now we have more potatoes on cropland under irrigation than any other Canadian province. It used to be PEI and then it was Manitoba, so now it's us. So we're going to do more of that. We also have Mondi, who's invested in our forestry sector. They invested $700 million to purchase an old pulp and paper plant. They're going to be upgrading it to the highest efficiency standards, and then also building a cardboard paper manufacturing plant. Because in northern Alberta, we've actually got very hard fiber, and so it's a very high quality fiber, and they're right on a rail line as well. So we're seeing a rejuvenation in our forestry industry. Our technology industry is just such a bright spot. A number of years ago, when we first got started, we were getting $34 million in venture capital in the tech sector. I think last year, in combination, I think we're up to $1.2 billion of investment. It's going to keep on growing. And so we've got a number of unicorns that have either grown in our market or relocated to our market. Emphasis is our Indian companies that are investing, and I hope we can attract more Indian investment as well. And then, of course, the film industry. I mean, how many of you saw The Last of Us, right? Okay, so no one in this room plays video games, apparently. Well, if you want to see The Last of Us, you will see the amazing transformation and the amazing sites that we have in Alberta. And we've won the production has won a number of awards for filmography. And so we're going to continue to attract that kind of investment as well. One of the things that I feel so very proud of is we've always talked about the need to diversify our economy. It's because we do have this roller coaster, and it's been a vision of premiers going back to Peter Lougheed, probably going back to Manning, actually. And now we're finally realizing it. And just give us another 10 years, and I think it's just going to be extraordinary what you see in our province. And part of it is we love wealth creators. We love job creators. We know that people who are willing to invest in our province to create those jobs, not only do they benefit their workers, they benefit us as a government, but they also are some of our most prominent philanthropists to give back to the community. So you will see other politicians of other political stripes often campaigning against our wealth creators, and that will not be us. So we have an open door policy, and we want to make sure that people understand we are definitely open for business.
That's a great message, and it makes me wonder why everyone is not moving to Alberta. You
can. Alberta's calling. Happy to have you. There's lots of room.
Yeah, that was a great campaign. So on a more maybe less positive note, 2024 started off with a bit of a bang in Alberta with the energy grid alert. So what happened there, and what message does that send about energy reliability and the energy transition?
Yeah, I started my career on the Calgary Herald editorial board as a commentator, and they were deregulating the market at that time, back in 1999. So I was assigned the task of learning about the electricity business, and I've been following it through different iterations in my career ever since. So I knew we were under strain. I watched that we've had what they call level 3 alerts. That's when you have to get to brownout because you've got grid instability. In the past, between 2006 and 2017, we had 3 level 3 alerts on our power grid. In the last 18 months, we've had 14. So I began to see that we were going to have a very serious problem. And all it took was that confluence of factors of high demand at a time when you've got low renewable being generated, as well as planned or unplanned outages of natural gas. And when I saw what happened in Texas a number of years ago, when they had a power grid failure, because they have a very similar market to us, 346 people died. So this isn't just an ideological conversation we're having. We're not just fighting for the sake of fighting. It's very serious when it's minus 35, minus 61 with the wind chill at the Edmonton airport one of those days, and the power goes out. So imagine, it's 5 o'clock at night and you're there cooking dinner and your kids are doing homework and you've put on an electric heater to get the extra heat, and then bang, you're plunged into darkness, not knowing when the lights are going to come back on or your furnace is going to start working again. And that's what a power outage is. It means that for 30 minutes at a time, 120,000 homes have to go into darkness, and we rotate it so that it doesn't burden and cause problems to any one particular community. We couldn't have that. So 4 o'clock at night, my electricity minister was watching as the power kept on climbing, 12,343 megawatts, the highest generation we've ever had. And at that time of night, there was 0 solar being generated. And there were 7 megawatts of wind being generated, even though we've got installed capacity of 6,000 megawatts of wind and solar. And it's soft comfort. I mean, people said the next day, oh, solar came out, sun saved the day. Well, I can't just tell people, wait until the sun comes up at 9 o'clock in the morning when it's 5 o'clock at night. So what we did is we made the hard decision to just do an emergency alert to our citizens. And what happened is within 1 minute, 100 megawatts came off the grid, and within less than 5 minutes, 200 megawatts came off the grid. To make that happen, it means people got up, unplugged their electric heaters, turned off their lights, and were sitting there waiting until the urgency passed. We probably had 500,000 households respond to be able to get that kind of instantaneous response, and it ended up saving the grid. But we don't want that to be the norm in Alberta. We want to make sure.
How did we get here? Like, how did it, in one of the most energy-rich nations in the world, how did we get to the point where we're asking Canadians to make a collective effort to conserve energy so we don't freeze?
Are there any bankers in the room? Because I met with somebody who wants to build 1,200 megawatts of natural gas, and they want to do it with carbon capture, and they want to use the carbon capture to do enhanced oil recovery. And they've talked to their 3 bankers, and their 3 bankers have said, no, sorry, too much risk from the federal government. We're not sure what's going to happen there with the electricity regs. But if you want to build a solar project, we can fund you. So when I had to enact the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act, it was because we may need to step in and de-risk those projects. It pains me to talk about having to set up a crown corporation, but if that's the only way that we can build reliable power, because of the uncertainty that Stephen Guilbeault has created with his ridiculous net zero electricity regulations, that's what we're going to have to do. I have now 41,000 megawatts of proposed power in the grid. Almost all of it is wind and solar. And I've got no natural gas in the grid. Fortunately, Capital Power is talking about working on small modular reactors, but guess what? They say that's not going to be implemented until 2035. So we've got a real problem. This is why when you see our signs and our advertising about no one wants to freeze in the dark in the middle of winter, it's not hyperbole. That's reality if we don't end up solving this problem.
And are you seeing take up from investors on that front? So you're talking about de-risking these projects. I assume that means the provincial government is stepping in to provide backup, financial backup for these projects. Are you seeing any take up on that yet? Is the private sector responding to that positively?
No, I mean, I haven't seen the private sector respond to that yet, which is why, again, we put the notion out there that we would have to build these ourselves, hoping that the private sector would respond. And at the moment, the banks are still saying there's too much risk, even on the project I described, which it would be a carbon capture project. And part of the reason for that is that the federal government says that they will allow abated natural gas on the grid, but it has to be 95% abated. And anyone who's in this space knows that we're probably at about 60% ability right now with our technology, maybe able to get up to 70 or 75%. But no one wants to be in a position where they're investing today and they either have to shut it down on January 1st, 2035, or one of the CEOs or the board members are going to go to jail because they're not in compliance under the draconian measures of the Act. So that's the environment we find ourselves in. That's why we're fighting so hard. We've got to continue to honor the Constitution and make sure that the provinces have the right to develop their resources.
Interesting. So we saw the federal government step in and have to fund the Trans Mountain project, which I assume it's a similar dynamic at play there. Are you prepared to do a similar thing in Alberta to actually step up and fund resource projects at the provincial level yourselves?
Yes, I mean we have to invest in the infrastructure that will get our products to market. I believe our investment arm, AIMCO, is an investor in Coastal GasLink. We, through our Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, we have already said that we were happy to facilitate a First Nations purchase of a portion of that line. And those are the kind of investments that we may end up having to do more of. And it's not unusual. When I was in Dubai, I met with representatives from in Qatar, and that was their approach. They said, we need to get our LNG to market. So let's make sure that we build the LNG export facility, and then let's also make sure that we build the LNG import facility in all the places we want to buy it, and make sure that we facilitate the movement of the goods in between. So that got me thinking, if that's the direction we need to go, then that's what we have to start thinking about. I don't like talking that way. I think that we should be able to have a free enterprise system and private market and federal and provincial governments working together so that the risk is borne by the investors. But we won't have our assets stranded. We need to make sure that we continue to be the economic engine. Our partners, Japan and South Korea and elsewhere, need to have a secure supply of our energy. And we think it's the responsible thing to do to make sure that we continue to push that along.
And are you working with other premiers on projects like this? So what does this mean, I guess, for someone from Ottawa, what does this mean for the future of federalism? So are you talking to other premiers about taking these kinds of steps, sort of separating yourselves a little bit from the federal government and proceeding of your own accord? What discussions are you having provincially about that?
I was reminded that we've been talking about economic corridors in our province since 1934. I think it was William Aberhart who first started asking for it. And here we are, coming up on 100 years later, and we still don't have economic corridors. So that's why we have Devin Drisking as our Transportation and Economic Corridors Minister. And one agreement he already signed was with Saskatchewan and Manitoba to work on a corridor that will get us to Hudson Bay. And even with the new premier there, Wab Kinew, we're going to be renewing that partnership. I know that Ranj Pillay in Yukon, he wants to work with us to see if we can make Skagway the main port for his territory. Up north, they want Grays Bay to be their major export option. And there's so much incredible activity already happening at Port of Prince Rupert. CN has improved their sidings, and there's been a massive investment in the export capacity there, and it's going to continue. And so that's another way for us to be able to get our product to market. So our approach is to work on establishing those partnerships with the willing, and not every province is willing to do that, and see if we can work as a bit of a Western economic powerhouse to be able to mutually benefit from those new ties.
That's fascinating. So you're working with a Liberal premier in Yukon, an NDP premier in Manitoba, an NDP premier in BC. So this is really a cross-partisan effort.
Yeah.
Just let me ask one last question. I know we're running out of time. You talked a lot about working with Indigenous stakeholders, Indigenous communities to participate in these projects. So why is that important to your government? Who are you working with? How do you see this as kind of the way to get things done?
We take economic reconciliation seriously. I don't think that there can be reconciliation with First Nations if you don't begin by addressing some of the serious economic challenges that our nations face. And it's been remarkable. So our Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, the idea behind it is let's just backstop major investments so that the nations can take an ownership stake in a project and be able to get the long-term dividend stream associated with that. So one of the best projects got announced, I believe it was November of 2022, and it was Enbridge, who had a number of partners, I think it's 23 nations, who now have a percentage stake in Enbridge, and they're earning an annual amount of revenue. We're up to, I'm looking at Rick to see how many projects we have. I think 7 major projects. And over the lifetime of those projects, it'll generate $1.2 billion worth of revenue for those nations. More than that now. And it's going to continue. So having own source revenue is going to be absolutely game-changing for the nations. So that's one part of it. But we also have to deal with the significant social issues that we see. And in many of our cities, it's First Nations people who come to the city and are not able to get a foothold and then find themselves in the state of addiction and homelessness. So it's part of the reason why we've also partnered with nations to build recovery communities. We've got recovery communities that we're building, 150 beds where we're going to do intensive therapy. The ones that will be built on nations will be using Indigenous healing practices. And we're going to get people off the street get them supported to build their recovery capital, reconnected with their community, connected with a job, connected with their spiritual practices, and on the road to recovery. So we're doing that because it's the right thing to do. We're not going to sit and argue with the federal government whose jurisdiction it is. This is what reconciliation is about, is recognizing that we share this land. And as I think it was Ori Crowfoot told me, I think, or maybe it was Chief Cody Thomas, like we're all treaty people. We are all signatories to those treaties. And so we all have an obligation to make sure that they're working and make sure that everybody's able to mutually benefit. So we walk that talk. And I can tell you, Rick Wilson has done an amazing job of ensuring that those relationships are continuing to grow and flourish. It matters because we think that we can be a true partner and an extra voice for those First Nations partners.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Premier. I know you're out of time and you're doing amazing work on the addictions and mental health front, which I wish we had more time to get into. But I know you've got a hard deadline here, so I'm going to turn it back to Natasha. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. As always, you're a fantastic moderator. Thank you so very much, Premier Smith, for taking the time to be here today and for so eloquently sharing how the Alberta advantage is a Canadian advantage. Thank you so much to our partners and presenters today, the Chemistry Industry Association, Energy for a Secure Future, IBC, CAP, and last but not least, a big thank you to all of you for attending. I'm sure I'll see some of you at the reception this evening, but until then, have a great rest of your day and we'll see you soon. Thank you.